Hi everyone. Today my question is, who genders you more correctly more often, men or women? Now this is an interesting question, and I think it's definitely location specific. So, in my particular case, I'm living in Cambodia right now, and so obviously my response is relative to my experiences here. I think probably if I was living in, say, Detroit or something, my experiences would be different, and so therefore my answer would be different. And in a few months' time, after I've lived in Europe for a little while, my answer will probably be different again. So I might actually re-answer this video at that time. But just keep in mind that my answer to this question is definitely location-specific. In terms of who genders me correctly more, I would say that women gender me correctly more often, but it's not by that much. So men are much more likely to sort of they're a little bit eager to misgender me if they know that I'm trans for some reason. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. But I've also had women misgender me in really crazy situations, like going into a restaurant wearing very overtly feminine attire, wearing makeup, and still having them say, "What would you like for dinner today, sir?" So it's definitely not like it's definitely not something where there's a huge difference. I would say men are probably something like 33% to 50% more likely to gender me as male, and but that's not to say that women don't do it, on purpose a fair amount of the time as well, and that was much more of a problem, like in the when I was first transitioning. But although it still is definitely, I still have times when it happens, and when it does happen, it's a little bit annoying, but what can you do? That's life. I have made an interesting discovery along those lines, that if I wear short sleeve shirts, I'm much more likely to be misgendered than if I wear long sleeve shirts. So for now anyway, consequently, I am wearing more long sleeve shirts and wearing less short sleeve shirts. So that's an interesting observation. Now, apart from being identified initially as male or as female, there's also the point of, like, am I being gendered, or am I being accepted as my gender, even if the person who is speaking with me knows that I'm trans? In this particular area, certainly women are much more accepting of me than men. A good example would be my ex-girlfriend Nai. Her female friends pretty much all accept me totally, and by totally I mean they're fine walking around me when I'm naked. They help me with my makeup. They're fine sleeping in the same bed. They're fine with me seeing them naked. I'm just one of the girls to them, and that is a really nice feeling of acceptance. And it's I don't think they're just being nice. I'm pretty sure that they just see me as female, totally, which is nice. So there's that, but on the other hand, men are definitely not that way. So an example would be, so in Asian cultures, they have there's very little tolerance for homophobia, for example. Many Asian cultures, I guess I should say, homophobia is very rampant, and in many cases they don't consider transsexual people to be even legitimate. So that is to say, they would consider somebody like me to be a man, and you can see that reflected in some countries that are ostensibly tolerant, or maybe tolerant, but they're not accepting, and that might be like Thailand, for example. So in Thailand, transsexuals cannot change the gender on their passports or their information, or government information, and so that sort of illustrates the difference between what is tolerance and what is acceptance. There's a big difference. So in both counts, I would say men are slightly less tolerant, but much less accepting. Women are a little bit more tolerant and much more accepting. So that's that's a big deal. So an example for personal experience would be I have some male friends here, and especially when I was first transitioning and I was very obviously trans, then they felt uncomfortable around me. So if we were in a group of people, it was a little bit better. If I was with Nai, my ex-girlfriend, who is a girl, obviously, then it was okay. But if it was just me and a male friend, an Asian male friend, they would feel uncomfortable. And I think that the reason is probably that it's sort of the cultural homophobia. And I say homophobia again because they don't necessarily even recognize the condition of being transsexual. So to them, it's just I'm walking down the street with a crossdresser or a ladyboy, and they don't want to. They don't want to be. Don't want somebody to think that they're dating me, for example. That would be a huge shame for them, and that hurts my ego and my my sense of self-worth and things like that a little bit. But I can kind of understand it because just culturally, it's just what they were exposed to since they've grown up and everything, and it takes time for things to change. And certainly where I am now in Cambodia, things move pretty slowly. So, that's just life, unfortunately. The other point would be in social situations, like at least in the subsection of Western society that I grew up in, which would be sort of roughly lower middle class, sort of maybe just above working class, Western people. I would say that at gatherings and things like this, they have they have a fair degree of segregation in terms of the conversations. That's not to say that the women are sitting on one side of the room and the men are sitting on another side of the room, although sometimes that certainly does happen, not necessarily with a room, but so, for example, in a house party, you might see a larger group of women congregating together and a group of men congregating together, and there may be some outliers or whatever, but you're going to see probably much more instances of same-sex conversation as opposed to mixed gender conversation. Again, of course, that's not absolute, but that's just in general. And so an example of this would be when I was having dinner with some friends in Thailand when I'd first gone over there in, I think, 2011 or 2012, I think. I was visiting my friend in Koh Samui, and he has a Thai wife, and over there it's even way much more segregated. For all intents and purposes at that time, to everyone who knew me, I was male. So I was upstairs with the men, and we were eating barbecue. The women were downstairs. They were cooking and speaking amongst themselves and having their dinner, and they were periodically bringing food upstairs for the men and taking dirty plates and things downstairs to wash, and the men were just staying upstairs. So I asked actually my friend and some of his friends, I said, like, why are all the women downstairs? Why don't you have them come upstairs? And they said, well, that's just how things are in Thailand. And I was kind of a little bit skeptical. I'd been in Canada for a little while, and I guess I just wasn't used to that. So when I went downstairs, I spoke to his wife and some of the other Thai ladies there, and they just said no. I mean, this is how it is in Thailand. The men sit upstairs, and the women, or the men sit in one place, the women sit in another place, and the women do the cooking and all that sort of stuff, and that's just how it is. So, certainly not a feminist utopia, but on the other hand, I mean, the men are expected to work and make money and things like that. So it's not necessarily that as horrible as it seems at face value. It's just sort of a more rigid gender roles than what we're used to in the West. Yeah, and another example would be having dinner recently with a friend here. This is just a month or two ago, and in regard to how I've been accepted after transition, I had dinner, and I think my friend had three or four male friends over, and a Brazilian girl over as well. And while we were hanging out, the Brazilian girl and I wanted to eat some ice cream, and we just ended up going to the kitchen, and there were no plates because he just moved into the apartment, and so we needed to wash the dishes, and he had made a big mess in his sink while cooking, so we cleaned that up, and we washed the dishes together, and we were just talking while that was happening, and we just ended up eating our ice cream in the kitchen and hanging out in there and talking about stuff, and the men were out in the living room, and they were talking about stuff, and not that this has to be the case or that this is even a good thing, but we were talking about relationships and things like that, and they were talking about, I don't know, beer and motorcycles. So it was kind of funny, and although not necessarily, again, not necessarily that necessarily good that these gender roles do exist. But for me at the time, it did feel a little bit validating that, as opposed to being stuck out there with the men talking about beer and motorcycles, I was talking about more things that were more interesting to me with another girl. So, yeah. Anyhow, that's all I have to talk about on this subject for now. I think I've gone on long enough, but I'm going to continue to answer questions roughly weekly. Perhaps some weeks there'll be two, perhaps some weeks there won't be any, but roughly every week I'm going to try and answer a question. Just so that you know, this particular question did not come from me, it came from a friend, and I did that because I felt like if I come up with my own question for myself, I'm probably going to come up with something that I definitely feel comfortable speaking about, or that I've already thought about quite a lot, and I feel that when I'm answering these questions, the stream of consciousness sort of thing, and just sort of figuring it out as you're speaking, is very important because it provides more insight into where I'm at right now in my life as far as my mindset and everything like that. Okay, so that's it for today, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.